Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. To close out the year, I've put together a few episodes of the podcast looking back at 2019 and forward to 2020. The second interview in this series is with Peter Ryan. Peter is the principal analyst at Ryan Strategic Advisory based in Montreal, Canada. He's well known globally for his thoughts and ideas about the development of CX. We've heard from him on this podcast in the past. And he's almost always on the road, checking out what's going on all over the world. It was a great opportunity to capture some of his thoughts at the end of this year. This is the final CX Files episode of 2019, so to all the listeners out there, have a fantastic and prosperous 2020. Happy New Year. Okay, Peter, thanks for appearing on the podcast. This is going to be the final episode of the year. So what I'd like to ask you is maybe just to have a look back at 2019, because there's only a couple of days left in the year. What was it that stood out? I know that you've traveled all over the world this year. So were there any particular trips or regions or technologies or companies that stood out?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's great to be back on the podcast. And you're right, it has been a whirlwind of activity over the course of 2019. Certainly a lot of travel and a lot of things are going on that stood out for me. I'd like to highlight just one or two, though, that I think are quite relevant. The first one that strikes me as being a standout was the chance to travel to London in the first half of the year for the annual Sitel Analyst Day that they decided to hold in the UK for various influencers and thought leaders to come in and find out what the company was doing. It really stands out for me in the sense that I have not seen Sitel as joined up and as cohesive as I found them over the course of that analyst day session, and certainly to hear some of the presentations that they were providing to their clients that followed on from the analyst sessions as well. It was very refreshing, and it really goes to show that the competitive spirit within Sitel is alive and well. Great news for Sitel, great news for the industry. Another element that I think I would definitely like to bring to the forefront is the opportunity I had to travel earlier in this quarter to Dallas, Texas, to provide a presentation to the management team at Working Solutions. Now, for those who might not know who Working Solutions is as a company, it is a home-based agent organization that's based in the Dallas area. I've known and have worked with Working Solutions for well over a decade, and I was really impressed with this team of their top level and midline managers who were talking about how to take virtual working, home-based agent working to the next level, how this needs to be done, what the plans, what they saw as the key plans were, and the ideas that they were putting on the table. It was very refreshing, and it tells me that this business model is very much alive and well in the context of broader global customer experience delivery. And just maybe if I can finish off with another visit to a location that I think was very important. It was the chance I had to provide a joint keynote presentation with Stephen Lloyd, who, as you know, and as many of your listeners will know, is the principal analyst and the founder of TrendSowl, recently established, and Steve is a tremendous thought leader in his own right. We had the chance to provide a presentation to the annual Contact Center conference in Prague in the Czech Republic about a month or so back. And it was truly, I think, inspiring for me to take a look at a location like the Czech Republic that has evolved from a lower-cost nearshore delivery point for multiple West European languages into a domestic market in its own right, and is just doing so fantastic. Some tremendous providers on the ground in terms of contact center service delivery, technology, recruitment services, consulting. Certainly, I think from the standpoint of having not been in the Czech Republic for about 15 years and to have come back at the end of 2019, and I might add, literally right before the celebrations for the 30th anniversary of the Velvet Revolution, was just tremendous. It's great to see a location like the Czech Republic in such great shape when it comes to customer experience delivery, and I certainly, and I think Steve would share this, have high hopes for them going forward.
That's great that you mentioned both Eastern Europe there and Steve Lloyd, because last week Steve was actually on the podcast. And one of the things he mentioned about this year was noticing how important platforms like the cloud, app store, and how these sort of delivery platforms are giving places like Eastern Europe a real boost, an ability to provide services without people or customers really needing to think about where they're actually delivered from.
Yeah, and I think Steve is bang on as always. The advancements in the technologies that we've seen around customer experience delivery have been tremendous over the course of the past 5 or 6 years. What I really think is going to be interesting is to take a look at how these advanced technologies, as it relates to the delivery of customer experience, alongside the analytics and the ability to drive better interactions through automation, through artificial intelligence, are going to be that much more important going forward, and how all these different technologies join up. Mark, one of the things that we as analysts have covered, people like yourself, myself, Steve Weston, Mark Angus, many, many others too. It's always been a case of what's next in the hopper, what's coming down the pike, what's going to be the next big thing in the following 12 months or beyond. But I really think we're hitting an apex in 2020 or going into 2020, where the ability to leverage various technology tools, but to bring those tools together into one uniform offering is going to be a great opportunity for outsourcers, for providers of customer experience, in order to drive better interactions, to drive better relationships with their clients, and to make sure that the industry keeps on progressing the way it needs to.
And so, on that point then, what are the kind of trends that you've been noticing? So certainly you're seeing that services are being changed by the available technologies, but what are your clients talking to you about? What are they worried about for 2020?
There's a lot of concern about the level of labor flexibility. I won't lie to you, this is a big problem in a lot of countries. I know that it usually gets identified or circled around for the United States, but from the perspective of many other countries in the key demand markets, the ability to source quality labor to work in a contact center is a big challenge. And until there's a redressment in the economic cycle, this is not going to go away. It's going to mean tougher recruitment, tougher retention. It's going to mean higher costs, at least domestically. I think there's also a lot of interest and a lot of, not necessarily interest, but the idea about how the concept of artificial intelligence is going to be applied in a customer experience setting. It's very much the buzzword. It's very much the focus of discussion right now, but there needs to be, I think, the ability to try and boil this type of an offering down to really figure out what are the key elements as it relates to contact center delivery that can be applied in 2020 and going beyond 2020. And finally, I think the domain of analytics is certainly an aspect that I'm going to be keeping a very, very close eye on, Mark. Analytics as a tool has been bandied about in the context of how you can get to know the different consumer groups better, or get to know the different consumers individually better. Very important from the standpoint of being able to drive better interactions and to be able to know the customer to the nth degree, which will mean a stickier relationship. But so many enterprises right now, frankly, just have not invested where they need to in the analytical capabilities that will get them to that nth degree. And being able to see how they're able to bridge that gap in 2020 is going to be important. I know it's on the minds of many. And I'll just throw one last one in there. I know analytics is supposed to be my last one, but I'll throw another one. That's the leveraging of the gig economy. I think we've seen some fantastic moves, especially by Concentrix with its Solve offering, taking advantage of gig working and this new way that especially much younger people, at least people younger than you and I, sorry to say that, but people who are perhaps getting out of high school or college, want to work and prefer to work. This is a great way of adapting the contact center offering to a labor market or a style of labor delivery that I think many organizations are looking to try and get their heads around. I think Concentrix has made some great strides with Solve. It'll be interesting to see how many of the competitors are going to respond in that regard.
Do you think that, in addition to the kind of Solve social approach, using the gig economy approach, we'll see a lot more work at home stuff as well then?
Well, we know that work at home is very popular amongst the enterprise community. In the 2019 front office BPO omnibus survey that I put out every year, we saw that in terms of the ability to supply home-based workers, that was seen as a very much a competitive advantage for outsourcers. It was in the top 5 when we asked that question to respondents across several different countries. I definitely think that the home working desire is there on the part of the buying community, the enterprise community. What's going to be key is that outsourcers that perhaps don't necessarily have a robust offering in that regard step up to the plate and are able to provide one to make sure that they're not losing out on business that might otherwise go to pure plays or to organizations that have certainly bricks and mortar, but also their own home working capabilities.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned also about costs going up, and certainly that seems to be the case in the US at present. But do you think then that maybe a more blended approach, like gig economy, work at home, as well as the traditional contact center, can perhaps address that, or we will have to see maybe more offshoring?
Well, I think that there's going to be an element of all these different angles to the ideal contact center model. Having bricks and mortar capacity domestically is obviously a great priority for so many different enterprises, notwithstanding some of the challenges that it takes to get this model off the ground. There's also certainly the home working, which is important. I would just throw out there as well the ability to incorporate automation to some degree to handle more frontline interactions is definitely something that's on the minds of many buyers right now. I was just in London last week doing a talk for an automation organization in regards to why this technology is important, and the level of enthusiasm from around the room amongst outsourcing members or outsourcing stakeholders was tremendous. The key is figuring out exactly what elements can be automated and making sure that automation is in a position to augment the interactions of the agents alongside the consumers. And then you get into the perhaps more established models of offshoring and nearshoring, definitely important in terms of not taking these off the table. Location, in terms of where the work is being done, certainly can't be understated. And then gig economy, really trying to figure out the labyrinth or the puzzle of the gig economy and bringing that in some way, shape, or form into a contact center offering, I think will definitely be a priority for many forward-thinking enterprises that want to work with forward-thinking outsourcers.
Okay, that's perfect. Thanks very much, Peter. Some great insights there.
Well, it's a pleasure, and I wish you a great holiday season and an even better 2020.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm @Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.